Welcome
Testing.
to the Artificial Intelligence Podcast with your host, Dr. Tony Huang. Today, I'm with a special guest, Aaron. Could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name's Aaron Painter. I'm the CEO of Nametag.
So, Aaron, what was your journey like to becoming the CEO of Nametag?
I spent most of my career in tech and I started at Microsoft. I was there for 14 years. I started in product. I was in Redmond for about 2 years as the first kind of product manager for Office back in the day, bringing the individual apps into what we then called the system. You now think of as 365. And then the rest of my time at Microsoft was actually spent outside the US. 4 years in France, several years in Brazil, several years in the UK, 5.5 years in China. And I ended up running sort of international expansion. So taking Microsoft into new countries around the world where there was a growing tech ecosystem. Microsoft wasn't present yet. And it was figuring out when do we open in a new market? Who's the first person? Who's the third person? Who do we sell to? What partners do we bring in? I loved it. And then ultimately, in my last 5.5 years in China, felt like this just entrepreneurial frontier of building a new business inside a big company. But the consistent theme was working with large enterprise customers, often governments and others. But they were big companies that were trying to figure out how to use technology in new ways. First it was productivity tools, and eventually it was the cloud. And there's a common theme across all of that is security. So a lot of my time was there. I left Microsoft. I didn't think I could find anything more entrepreneurial than building the business in China. I wrote a book in 2017 focused on listening and the power that listening can bring to build relationships with people, be them employees or customers. And then I went to run a company that was based in the UK. It was owned by a private equity firm. It was AWS's first and largest partner in Europe, helping big companies thinking about cloud transformation. And I left that just before the pandemic, almost to the week. And I moved to the US, but back to the US, and my partner was based in Seattle, coincidentally. And I was like, okay, I'm trying to figure out what to do next and think about all these different options. And then suddenly it felt like the world was falling apart. As we all know, everything was remote and there was no more in person. And I had this wave of friends and family members who had their identity stolen. I was like, all right, this is crazy. I'll be a good friend. I'm gonna be a good son. We're gonna jump on the phone. We're gonna figure this out. And everyone we called just had the same nonsense of before I can help you, can you tell me what street you lived on in whatever year, or the last four of your social, or your favorite color? And it felt like nonsense, but it turned out someone had called before us with those nonsense answers and was able to take over accounts. And so it led me to this conclusion of how is it in today's world we don't know the human behind the screen? Are they human, let alone which human? And that's the front line of protecting so many of the digital accounts in our lives.
Yeah, I know that like security is a big problem right now, especially in the current like environment. I'm curious what are your thoughts on like security, identity fraud, like in the past. What were like some really big trends that occurred?
It's interesting. I was speaking with a reporter a couple weeks ago, and he had been at it a long time. And he's fraud to me is check fraud. And he was talking about the days of the catch me if you can star when like people writing fake checks and then interpreting and looking at the signature lines. And it felt like that was early fraud, literally check fraud, and people manipulating things by creating physical fakes. And then it occurred to me, he said, you don't upload a check in a web browser. And I said, yeah, no, you're right. You can do it now in mobile banking apps. Like that kind of became the big breakthrough. I have a mobile phone. I'm inside the bank app. I can take a photo of the check and deposit it. Yet, what occurred to me in the world of identity verification, particularly like the scan your ID and take a selfie flow, was that it had always been for regulatory compliance, not to fight fraud, not for security. And 100% of that market was upload an image of your driver's license, let's say, whether you made it, it's a PDF, who knows, into a web browser. It's assessed for accuracy, and then you move on. And it felt, gosh, this is not a secure process. This can't be used. Can't trust these physical identity documents in the digital world because the process of capturing them and analyzing them is just not built for security. It's built for compliance. And that technology has been around 15 plus years, and it's, I think, led to a lot of the gaps that we eventually started to see in the market.
Yeah, I know that. So I'm flying out on vacation pretty soon, and the country I'm going to requires a visa. And one of the requirements is that I need to take a picture of my passport and then upload it to a website. But I don't know for myself whether or not that website is secure. I'm hoping it's secure. So like for folks that kind of need to do that, is there any guarantees for like foreign countries that they have those safeguards set up, or are you just risking it because it's a different country?
You're risking it, I think, everywhere you do that. You don't necessarily know what's happening with the data. But even more so, the company or the country in this case who's asking, they also don't know that's actually you. because there's so many ways to either use someone else's information that's been submitted, or in today's world, to what we used to call digitally manipulate, use a really good Photoshop and save as PDF and upload, or now to use deep fakes, AI generated deepfakes in particular, and upload that created content as someone wanting to be you. So imagine more someone wanting to apply for that visa or prepare to enter the country as you. It's an incredibly insecure process today. And it's caused a lot of questions and doubt for all these processes that need to know who someone is, like a visa process.
So in your opinion, like what do you think has changed in the past that's different now? Is it just like the technology's changed? Is it the invention of like generative AI that's accelerating a lot of things? Like in your point of view, what's the big thing that changed?
There have been a few kind of colliding trends, and one of them in particular has to do with identity and access management, which is this idea that the way we access our digital accounts, let's say as an employee logging into your workplace or as a customer accessing your account, we've learned as an industry in security that we need to apply things like MFA, multi-factor authentication, to that process. The problem is that there used to be a forgot my password button on a website, but when you added MFA, that button went away. And so if people got locked out of MFA, they upgraded their phone, something didn't work, it meant you had to call the help desk. You still have to pick up the phone, you have to call the help desk, or maybe go somewhere in person and say, no, no, it's me. I'm locked out of my account. I need help getting back in. And so all the efforts that we put in to make the authentication technology secure, MFA, those tokens, how they're sent, received, it goes out the window if it's so easy to circumvent simply by saying you're locked out. And so the concept of adding MFA aggravated this. The concept of remote work further aggravated it because you think that whether you're a remote worker who's locked out of an account, or even more recently, this idea of being a remote worker who's interviewing or starting a new job, you don't necessarily know who that candidate is. Yet you're going to email their personal Gmail account, login credentials to go set up and access your corporate network. So remote work became another trend. And all these things have come together now with this world of Gen AI, where it's even easier to impersonate someone in that remote or virtual context. And so it's created this sort of perfect storm from a security perspective where it's frankly far too easy. And we're in the middle of this kind of epidemic of identity theft and impersonation attacks on accounts because everyone's operating remotely. It's very easy to create an impersonation of someone else and then to trick or fool the traditional processes to verify who they are. And that's created this really challenging cybersecurity environment right now.
It's interesting. I had to hire some folks at previous roles, and I caught two of them cheating during the interview process. So the first one was before the invention of like the widespread popularity of AI, where like when they went out to do a technical interview, they would use like some type of cheating device to help them cheat. But now what's happening is that they're using like Gen AI to help them cheat, or even crazier is that they're hiring like someone offshore to go and do the technical interview, and then for the rest of the interview, it's them. So I actually caught this one guy where he interviewed for like a non during the non-technical portion, and then during the technical portion, he swapped it out with someone else, and it went through just fine because I wasn't in the technical interview until I actually saw the video, and it was like, oh, that's not him. Like something as simple as like just interviewing for a job using some low tech technology, like just swapping out people. The topic of trying to authenticate the right person is really important, especially right now because with for instance like Gen AI, that you can create some really compelling deepfakes that can persuade people to like either think that you're someone who's not them or even be at a different location when you're not there. So in your opinion, do you think that I think like deepfakes are probably like the most dangerous form of like fraud right now? What's your take on what's the most dangerous type of fraud?
Yeah, I think impersonation compromises in particular the most dangerous right now. And deepfakes have just been new tools that are arming these bad actors with sort of superpowers to commit these kinds of account takeovers. Deepfakes can be used to create content. Someone said this, look, I caught this video or heard this audio clip. Definitely a concern, great discussion to have. But the other side of it is using deepfakes to impersonate someone and to take over an account. And that's really what we've seen become just taking over like wild right now, and particularly in this onboarding and hiring. And so in the last 3, 6 months, I do not speak with a business leader, a CEO, a CISO, you name it, in the Fortune 500, who does not instantly start sharing, oh, let me tell you about our situation and what just happened to us. And you see it from the FBI even. The FBI is issuing now regular warnings, focusing particularly on North Koreans, which I used to think was, oh, I'll put that in quotes, like it's conceptually a North Korean, but it's actually often a lot of North Koreans. They're not necessarily all in North Korea. They often have collaborators in other parts of the world, or they're physically somewhere different. But this idea that you apply for a job, similar to the story you shared, maybe their video's broken, maybe it's just not consistent between interviews, someone gets the job. Some companies do background checks when they say, okay, it's part of our hiring process. But a background check for 95% of the background check providers out there is a social security number, for example, in the US, which you can pass a background check, but you don't know that's actually the person that's applying for the job. So background check's clear. In the US, for example, you might have an I-9 process on day 3 or 5. Is there a right to work? Fine. But both of those really weren't built for security. They're built for regulatory compliance. And so suddenly you have this new hire who's joined. You don't necessarily know who they are. And the goal in the North Korean context typically is not stealing confidential information for the nation state. It's be on payroll as long as possible. It's a payroll scam. It's collect income as long as I can. Oh, eventually I get detected. Maybe there's a ransomware or data extraction element, but often it's wanting to extract payroll, convert it to Bitcoin eventually, and bring it back to the state. And this we're just seeing played over and over right now because it's just a gap in our technology stack. You don't know who you're provisioning for MFA or for access to your company's environment when it's in a remote context.
So, in your opinion, what's the best way to protect yourself from this? Either I would say in one scenario, like how do you protect yourself as a company, and then another scenario, how do you protect yourself as a person?
Yeah, I think the person one is even harder in a way. And there are a lot of sort of social techniques you can pursue. Is this a person approaching me? You get the random text messages or WhatsApp groups. And I often think about who's the person? Do I know this person or is it one person in a large group? What's the context? Are they asking me for something in a unusual characteristic so that I'm not used to being asked for from this person? Have I met this person before? Do I know them? What's the channel? Again, is it one-to-one? Is it in a big group? There are personal things we can deploy to just try and be skeptical and curious. As a company, what we've seen is this increased adoption of using more advanced tools to try and verify someone's identity. And a lot of that has to do with preventing deepfakes. And so our logic, if we zoom in on deepfakes for a second, is that so many tools today, or a bunch of tools at least, that are trying to do deepfake detection, which is really this like AI versus AI arms race. My detection model outwitted a bad actor using a different model. I think that's a very hard arms race to win. Someone will always be slightly ahead. The concept that we spend a lot of time thinking about is how do you prevent a deepfake from being used? So if you go back to your example before with interviewing people, one of the leading ways that you can use a deepfake is or deploy it is what's called an injection attack. And the easiest way to think about it, an injection attack is almost like Zoom or Teams. As easy as it is to select the camera or select the microphone, you can select a piece of emulator software that's running kind of a real-time deepfake. Those platforms were not designed to prevent against that. They make it easy, actually, to pick a variety of different input channels. If you're in a web-based environment and doing some kind of identity verification or other flow, it's easy to inject an alternative source for that evidence capture. So injection attacks are one. The other big thing is a presentation attack, which you think about, am I holding something up to the camera to trick it? Could be Mission Impossible style where you're wearing a three-dimensional mask, or it could be holding up a photo or a video or another phone where you've got doctored information or kind of a deepfake image of some kind. So a lot of the logic that we've seen companies apply to fight this is to say, all right, let's use more advanced ways of preventing deepfakes as opposed to simply detecting them.
Now, I know that like when systems get penetrated, typically isn't the most like the easiest or most common way to do it is with a social engineering attack where you're just attacking like a call center or like a customer service line because typically those that line of business usually has access to everything about the company because they have to. Isn't that kind of like the point of attack that most attackers would go after? Or what do you think?
Yeah, no, you're spot on. There's a little bit of nuance there. It's definitely there are social engineering related attacks. However, oftentimes where people are now using deep fakes, bad actors are using deep fakes to deceive the social engineer in more advanced ways. And so, yes, then if you can get access, let's say, take poor MGM 18 months ago, that's become the poster child of this, and the fault of them. But there was a 60 Minutes episode on it. It got that mainstream where a bad actor called the help desk pretending to be an MGM employee who was locked out of their account. Roughly 8 minutes later, they socially engineered their way with a variety of tools at their disposal. The help desk agent reset access. And then that person who got in was a privileged access account. They were able to deposit ransomware when MGM was offline for a couple of weeks. And that's been the attack. This has been repeated over and over. And you're right, it's a social engineering attack, but it was armed with more advanced tools for the bad actors to have. And those help desk reps, they're in the business of getting tickets done quickly. They're in the business trying to want to help people. They're not identity interrogators. And they actually typically don't have that much special information to be able to access to when they're interviewing someone. So increasingly, the advice is, in fact, Okta's advice to companies after that attack was do a video verification. Jump on a Zoom call or Teams call, look at the person, maybe have them hold up their ID on the video call. But again, then you get into, you can do that, but you might not know who's actually on the other end of that link.
So you guys came up with some cool tech that should be able to help solve some of these issues. It looks like you guys came up with a new technology called deepfake defense. Can you describe what that does?
Yeah, it was basically taking this concept of trying to shut down or prevent injection attacks in particular, and then being better armed against presentation attacks by using mobile phones. And so the process of identity verification, of scan your ID and take a selfie, it always happened in a web browser. We said, let's do it exclusively in a mobile platform. If you do it in a mobile platform, coincidentally, a lot like depositing that check in the mobile banking app, you benefit from all the features of mobile, like cryptographic attestation, knowing that the device itself, down to the hardware layer, has been untampered and it's not a rooted device. Therefore, you know that your evidence collection is legitimate. So you know the cameras on the device are the ones that are doing the capture of the selfie and of the document, and you're not injecting a deep fake. So you shut it down at right at that layer. You don't need to get into analyzing this as a deep fake because you've stopped someone from trying to inject one. And then when assessing presentation attacks, you get to say, I get to use all the advanced tools and telemetry and data and cameras and sensors in these modern mobile phones to assess, is this document real? Is this person really a human? Are they three-dimensional using the Face ID spatial camera, for example, and assess the document with a lot of the same sophisticated tools. And so by bringing identity verification from the web browser into a mobile environment exclusively, it let us have this fundamental technology that we could then apply for security use cases, like the help desk, like being locked out of an account, like onboarding a new hire, but all with this underlying technology that was just built to do secure identity verification.
And is that like available for like Android, like iPhone? What's it available for?
Yeah, it had to be Android, iOS, most recent versions back. We work a lot with companies, big companies that want to protect their workforce, and increasingly companies that want to then protect high value customer accounts. And if you're a customer of HubSpot today, the CRM platform, and you unfortunately get locked out of your account, if you click on, there's now a button that was forgot my password. They did a great thing and added MFA to those customer accounts, but then people got locked out. And so now there's a button that says, oh, you're unable to access your account. You have two choices. Contact support, it takes 48 to 72 hours, or click here and use Nametag in our case to get right back in. And we then guide the user to the mobile device. They do a secure identity verification flow, and then it unlocks access to their account, and they can reconfigure things like MFA. So it works in consumers, and then it works, of course, the same thing in a workforce context. If you're locked out of your account, or you want to have a self-service way to reset your Okta, your Duo, your Entra, or if you're a new hire, most recently, who you're onboarding and you want to configure that Okta Duo Entra instance with some sense of confidence that you know who the person is who's getting their account activated.
So what's the future for identity theft, especially in the age of Gen AI? What do you think is like gonna happen pretty soon?
I think we're going to see a lot more attacks continue. Unfortunately, this is a wild epidemic, and people are taking it to new use cases. It was help desk, like the MGM attack, and then it became our learning and listening to customers was, hey, it's great, but you know what? Half my help desk tickets are people who are locked out. Can you just automate that? So that led us to say, all right, let's make an automation way for an employee, let's say, to self-service, verify themselves and unlock. That was a great innovation. But bad actors have now said, let's take advantage of the hiring process. And so a lot of the focus has jumped to that end of the spectrum where it's, let me just get a fake job or let me pretend I'm a new hire. And so we're seeing people just like in any system or secure system in particular, you find the fringes, you find the chasms, the breaks where you can enter. And typically it's not trying to crack phishing resistant MFA, it's trying to go in on the edges where it's onboarding or you're locked out. And I think we're going to see more and more of those vectors pop up and places where you need to apply some sort of secure identity verification to protect them.
For our listeners at home who are interested in learning a little bit more about this, what's the best way to get in contact with you?
LinkedIn. We do a ton of content and really try and stay on top of what we're learning, what we're hearing. I think one of our differentiators as a company is that we've earned the trust of a lot of our customers, and they teach us a lot, and we move very quickly in response. And so we write about things that we learn, what we're hearing from government agencies, what we're learning from fraud attempts. So we publish a lot on LinkedIn. We love the content. We love feedback on it. We love questions and engagement. But LinkedIn is kind of our platform of choice.
And I'm sure that listeners at home are interested in this next question, which is like, what are some like quick tip things that they can do to protect themselves against fraud?
Big category. I come back a little bit to really being curious and skeptical. Because someone has your phone number doesn't mean that they are your friend. And so I think a lot of the attacks that we see come in that way. I think if you have accounts in your life, please put MFA on them. By the very least starting point, if there's an option to add multi-factor authentication, not SMS, get a PIN, but any kind of authenticator app or things like that, that is a really critical path for all the personal accounts in your life. MFA is necessary, but it's not sufficient, unfortunately. And then when you see companies that offer additional account takeover protections, call it like HubSpot. For me, that's a CRM provider of choice because I know that my account is additionally secured beyond MFA. And I look for those things certainly when I'm choosing vendors and suppliers for our own company.
Thanks so much for being on the show. And until next time, stay curious.